Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for coming. It's a wonderful day to be in Osage, and it's a wonderful day to have this dedication. My name is Kurt Meyer. I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the Mitchell County Historical Society. And we were talking informally. Dean said, we want you to accept this gift. And I said, that would be a pleasure. So I have prepared, because if I don't prepare, then you just hit the top of my head and you don't want that. This chandelier, on behalf of the citizens of Mitchell County, and on behalf of the membership and the leadership of the Mitchell County Historical Society, I also accept this magnificent gift on behalf of untold future generations who will come here and will marvel at this chandelier, its design, its functionality, its beauty. I'm especially grateful to the Hoffman family, to the St. Peter's Lutheran congregation, and to the community of Toterville for its years of love and care and stewardship that this gift represents. In addition to gratitude, with acceptance comes responsibility. And in this case, responsibility to care for this gift, to display it, to capture its story, and to interpret its legacy as you've told it to us and will tell it to us today. Now, at last, this chandelier has a home as appropriate as St. Peter's Church once was. I pledge to do everything possible to ensure that it's a permanent home. From this day forward, for all who enter this building, may this chandelier raise our sights, may it illuminate our vision, and may it enlighten our thoughts. To the good people of Toterville, Danke schön. Thank you very, very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce my friend Russell Baldner to tell us much more about Toterville and about this chandelier and anything else you want to tell us about. Russell.
I'm going to hold this, I think. Thank you, Kurt, for the kind words of introduction. That's a dangerous invitation you just gave me to speak about anything, but I will limit. I would like to share Lutheran, but also share some of the history as near as we can tell with regard to the chandelier, based on some old documentary evidence with which some of you may be somewhat familiar already, and also some antique photography. A little bit about the congregation to put things in context. The St. Peter was established first informally in the fall of 1868 by Pastor Karl Friedrich Jung, who just happened to also be Merle Huffman's great-great-grandfather and the great-great-great-grandfather of Merle's children here today. Pastor Jung was from Ridgeway, what is often called the Old Stone Church, which is about 10 miles from where my wife Catherine and I currently live at Spillville. It was a hub of German Lutheran missionary activity that he conducted in extreme northern Iowa. St. Peter, at what later became Toterville, there was no town at the time, St. Peter was the westernmost of those congregations that Pastor Jung established. In 1868, he served as the first pastor coming overland, approximately 60-70 miles from that area. In 1871, the congregation was officially organized, wrote their first constitution, the first 4 members being Philip Baldner Sr., who happens to be my great-great-grandfather, also Merle Huffman's great-grandfather, and the Huffman siblings' great-great-grandfather, and also Margaret Hagelin, another kinsman here, her great-great-grandfather, and I don't know if I'm missing somebody else out here, but he was one of the first 4 founding members, along with William Langrock, George Georg Schultz, and I don't know if we have any of the Schultz folks here today or not, and also Heinrich Henry Toter, originally with 2 dots and umlaut on the O. That was in 1871. In 1874, the first resident pastor came. George Georg Landgravy from Germany, from Wartburg Seminary, which of course was established early on here in Iowa, part of the old German Iowa Synod, to which also St. Peter's belonged. That was in 1874. 2 years later, they built the first structure the congregation did. It was a parsonage, actually, that stood just opposite Merle Huffman's farm, where he currently lives today. Built in 1876. The original part of that building today still stands and still used as a home. It served not only as a parsonage, but also as a place for the congregation to worship. However, within 8 years, it proved to be rather too small with the growth of the congregation, and so in 1884, the congregation voted to build a new church, which they did. The pledges that they had at the time were within $100 of the finished cost of that church in 1884. In this book that was printed back at the time of the building of the new church in 1967, there in fact is a picture of the old church standing out in the country, right next to what was the parsonage there. That was in 1884. The church stood there until 1907, at which time, of course, the village of Totterville had been established in the late 1800s, 1898, platted by Heinrich and Mina Toter, and it was an up-and-coming community, and the discussions concerning the possible future of the church took place, and in fact, the cemetery had already been started, the new one, on the outskirts of what is now Totterville in 1903, or 4, right in there. The old one, the cemetery being out in the country. And anyway, it all led to eventually 1907. And the decision on the part of the congregation to relocate the church, which originally stood 1 mile east of Totterville and a half a mile north, again, opposite Merle Huffman's farm, where he's lived for a good many years here. Our former neighbor, 3/4 of a mile away, we lived down the road and around the corner. So, in 1907, the congregation sought to move the church. It was successful. And the story, of course, was also passed on as how the organist was playing, and you have to help me, Darlene, the organist at the time was Ella Geffert, who played the organ as the church was moved across the fields. Years ago, I heard that when it came into town, someone playing the organ, organist Ella. Heinrich Toter was instrumental in relocating it. In fact, gave a block of the village of Totterville to the church, the congregation. Also at that time, the new parsonage was built right opposite the church, which ironically, 100 years later in 2007, was moved back out in the country. I always thought that was an interesting symmetry. The church came in 1907, and the parsonage was built, and then the parsonage moved back out in the country in 1907, sort of taking turns here. Anyway, so be it. I'm going to jump forward here. In 1966 and 67, we built the new St. Peter Lutheran Church, and in the process of that, the old church was, of course, demolished. In the foundation was a box, a cornerstone box, if you will, a metal box, in which a number of items had been placed. Among them, a lengthy history and more than just it was kind of like a long letter written by Pastor Landgravy, who of course was still ministering there until 1911. And in that letter, and I in fact brought a copy of it today, I think other than the ones that the church has that I provided, I think it's the only one. I made a copy of that 45 years ago when we were doing the history of the church and translated it and so on. Anyway, in that letter, it's very interesting. It was moved to town, the church was, and it says, then at that time, what followed, right at that time, was the church acquired a new pulpit, a new altar, and a new chandelier. And of course, in discussing all of this with Dean, the question arose, well, a new chandelier, does that mean a new one versus the old one? Or is it simply a new one when there hadn't been one? Well, we were talking about the old photograph of the church. Back in 45 years ago, 1967, we had located this old photograph of St. Peter Lutheran. That one can easily date, because it shows the organ, the pipe organ, which was purchased in 1902. So this photograph does not predate 1902. What is even more interesting, however, is this photograph shows the old altar and the old pulpit, because I remember the new ones, of course. And it also shows this magnificent chandelier. It's not maybe the very best photograph, but it is priceless. And indeed, it is absolutely what is now on display. Well, putting it all in context, Pastor Landgravy wrote that the church, after it was moved, acquired a new chandelier, a new pulpit, and a new altar. This is the old altar, the old pulpit, and one is reasonably old chandelier. In fact, this is very likely, it's rather difficult to prove it, but it is very likely the photograph of the interior of the church, either before its relocation, sort of one last picture of it perhaps, that or it would have had to have followed almost immediately after it was brought into Totterville, before the new fixtures were acquired by the congregation. So all of this sort of adds up to a case of how old is the chandelier? Well, I don't know for sure, but based on the documentary evidence, it seems reasonable to conclude that this chandelier was very likely the chandelier that was in the old church when it was originally out in the country. Who knows, it may date back to, in fact, 1884 when the church was built, unless we find a date, a patent or something on the chandelier, and I don't know that there is, Dean, is there? Anyway, one concludes that, in fact, this chandelier is very likely the one that was hanging in the church for, well, what would have been perhaps 2 decades prior to the relocation. And then what Reverend Landgravy wrote about the new chandelier, which one that is, I don't know. That's at least as close as we could come. But this picture is a one of a kind, and in combination with Pastor Landgravy's history at the time it was moved, and he was quite explicit. The records of St. Peter Lutheran are wonderfully written, with family registers, a complete history, if you will. Some of the former pastors also wrote narratives too, but the old church records, the minutes of meetings, the family registers that identified everybody where they came from in Germany, etc., were absolutely priceless. So we'll leave the history at that point, I think, today, and any other chapters of that will do a different day, I believe. But that's the context of this magnificent fixture. Thank you.
I also have reason to direct your attention to the wisdom of another friend of mine, Dean Steffen. Dean is one of the people that really made this happen. And so it's with great pleasure that I bring to the podium for his comments my friend Dean Steffen.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Michoacanas Historical Society for accepting this, and this has been a tireless project for me and my wife Diane. We've worked very hard on it, and this is a dream fulfilled. I want to talk a little bit about the chandelier. In 1967, when they, just about the time they built their new church up there, Merle acquired this chandelier at a church auction. Well, at that church auction, the chandelier was basically sitting in pieces, and it was in boxes, all the chimneys and everything, and nobody would bid on it. Well, Merle bought the thing for $10. And he stored it in his house and in the basement, and then later when he built his new house, they moved it to the new house and stored it in the basement. Well, one story about this, when it was in the basement, was that we are pretty fortunate that this chandelier survived. Because it seems like every time Merle went down the basement, he stubbed his toe on it. And he says, you don't know how many times I almost threw that away. Well, anyway, that takes you up to where we're at right now. And one Sunday afternoon, Merle and Dennis were over to our place, and we were having Sunday dinner. And being so involved in a museum like I am, I decided that I should, I must keep telling Merle all the time how great this museum is. So Dennis and Merle stopped on the way back from our dinner. And later that evening, I got a call, and Merle says, Dean, that chandelier, he says, I talked it over with Dennis, and it belongs in the museum. Well, right away, I thought, wow, here we go. Well, anyway, I never really realized, I knew it was a chandelier in the basement, but all I ever seen was just part of the big part of it sticking out behind other stuff. And anyway, we went right over there, and Merle had it kind of spread out, and I was trying to visualize what it looked like, and right away I knew we had something. So we took all the pieces home. When we got home, I made a spot in our garage where we could hang it from the rafter and start assembling it. Well, as Diane was cleaning some of the parts and laying everything out for me, I started assembling it. And the more I assembled it, the more excited I got. Well, I couldn't get it done in one day. So, anyway, when I went to bed that night, I couldn't even sleep because I couldn't wait till the next morning to get back out there and keep going on it again. Well, anyway, the chandelier is 100% original, except there was 12 of the 8 were missing. So I was thinking, I'm never going to find chain to match that. Because this chain that is on here, that is copper chain. Well, I stopped at Hardware Hank down here, and lo and behold, they had exactly the same chain, but it was in steel. Well, that's no big deal because I was going to paint it all black anyway. Well, when I got putting the thing together, I thought, okay, what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to make every chain the same number of links. And that'll be simple because the second and the third tier are free floating. So you can kind of get the picture where I'm trying to figure out how I can keep everything leveled. Well, I made every chain the same length according to what it should be. And while I was doing that, I started hanging everything up. I got it all hung up, and it was like this. And I thought, well, that isn't going to work. So then I started adding a chain link here and one there. And it took me about 4 hours to get it leveled. Like I said, the chandelier is completely original except for the chains. The bottom section, the lighting section, is 4 feet wide. And the chandelier is 6 feet high. The bottom of the chandelier, the actually burner part, is separate from the rest of it. Will screw on separate to the main shaft. But the bottom wheel tank is a wheel tank that has, now this is all original. And when I was going through the internet trying to find that chandelier or something similar to it, I couldn't find anything. But I did find out that the burners are made by P. Harvard A, and the burners are very, very rare burners. So it gives you an idea of the worth of the chandelier, not only in history, but the worth of it in monetary value. But I told Merle about that, and Merle says that doesn't mean anything. He says, I want it where people can see it. I mean, how much better can you get than that? I did find one place on the internet that there's a chandelier that is quite similar to this one that is in Florida. I called these people and I tried to ask them, I started asking them some questions about their chandelier. Well, they didn't know the date either, but keep in mind, in 1884 is when this church was built, and they put their chandelier up in their church in 1886. So there's a direct parallel right there. And not only that, they still have the wheel part at the bottom, the spoked wheel, just like is right there in that chandelier. The burners are exactly the same number of burners, the same chain, and the same reflective glass. So I'm almost positive that's the same chandelier, but they did not know who manufactured it. But I do know that B. Harvard did manufacture lamps, so that could possibly be who made it. So I found that very, very interesting. The chandelier is made out of copper, iron, glass, cardboard, tin, and brass. The bottom panels that you see that go all the way around, the bottom panels lift out of the top, and they all set down in there. And then there's a piece of cardboard that goes over the top, black cardboard, to help in the reflection process. Now, if you could just imagine what it must have been like on Christmas Eve in a dark church, that had to be just beautiful, just fabulous. The only drawback I've read about that is the kerosene smell. And I'd sure like to light it up in here, but I do not think the fire department would appreciate that. So we're just going to leave it like it is. And the burners also have the original wicks in them. And it looks to me like you could put kerosene in, adjust them, and you could light it right up. It's good to go. The tank and the burners has a fill cap on top. The first and second tiers, like I said, are free floating, and the third tier in the center has kind of a cement or grout in it. And I think that's kind of used as a ballast, because I believe that this not only was on like a pulley system, but there was a kind of a counterweight system on it. Make it easier to raise it and lower it. That's just what I'm thinking is why that ballast is in that third tier. The hook that you see at the top with the chain is not original, but the hook at the top was the hook that the chandelier was hanging from. So that pretty much sums up about the chandelier. If there is any questions, I'll try to answer them for you. Over here we do have some pictures, and the picture that Russell was talking about, the picture of the chandelier, the bottom of it hanging in the church, I do have a copy of that over there. You can take a look at that. And I believe it was at the dedication of the new church. I have a couple of pictures there too that you can look at. I'm open to any questions, and I'll try to answer them for you if anybody has any questions. That was an interesting, that was a project. First of all, we knew we had to get a lift in here. Well, you got limited rooms to get a lift in here, so you're real limited to the size of the lift. We could only go in the air 23 feet. Well, it's 42 feet to that rafter up there. So we're a long ways from the roof. So what we did is we got an extension pole, and the extension pole was actually a duster. And it had kind of a flip-flop duster, and we put a string over the top of it with a weight on it. And we lifted the string and the weight up over the rafters and fed it down till the weight brought the string down, tied it onto the chain, and then pulled the chain up over the top and put a C-clamp. Well, anyway, that was quite a project, but that was just fun. I enjoyed that so much. I mean, this whole thing, this project, from the day when Merle told me about it, I've just been excited about it, and I want to thank everybody for coming today, because you have made a dream come true for all of us. And I want to thank people in Totterville and, like I say, the Historical Society. And now I'll turn it back over to Kurt. Yes, I can. I do. I'm not the speaker that these people are, but I try to do the best I can. Anyway, those of you that don't know Merle Hoffman, Merle, would you stand up? Let's give him a round of applause. And Dennis, where are you at? Dennis, stand up. You were in on this stuff. And I do want to thank Russell for giving us that excellent history of the St. Peter's Lutheran Church. And then Darlene Kilson, she's kind of trimmed up the edges for me. She's added a lot to the story and helped me on this. And would you stand up, if you would, please? Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yes, Margaret. Diane, do you want to stand up too, please? I was told not to do that. But rules are to be broken. Okay.
Russell is going to lead us in a word of prayer.
Today's dedication of the St. Peter Lutheran Chandelier brings to mind a passage from the 5th chapter. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Now, while it is highly unlikely that the author of those words had a chandelier in mind, nonetheless, this verse from the Gospel seems yet appropriate today. Suspended high above the German Evangelical Lutheran St. Peter congregation, for many years, this magnificent fixture illuminated the sanctuary and cast its light on faithful parishioners gathered below. It was an integral part of their worship and contributed to their growth and journey of faith. As such, its light became a part of who they were, part of their faith, their mission, and their works, part of their light shone before men. And so, in keeping with the historical character of this chandelier and St. Peter Lutheran Church, we hear today in closing the words that Christ taught, the Lord's Prayer, Das Vaterunser, spoken in the historic German language of the congregation. Vater unser, der du bist im Himmel, geheiligt werde dein Name, dein Reich komme, dein Wille geschehe, wie im Himmel, also auch auf Erden. Unser täglich Brot gib uns heute und vergib uns unsere Schuld, wie wir vergeben unseren Schuldigern. Und führe uns nicht in Versuchung, sondern erlöse uns von dem Übel. Denn dein ist das Reich und die Kraft und die Herrlichkeit in Ewigkeit. Amen.